The contractor called me 11 days after my family changed the locks on the house I had lived in for 23 years. He did not begin by asking whether I was Evelyn Rose Mercer. He asked whether I had ever carved my name inside a kitchen wall. I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store in Columbus, Ohio, counting how many nights I could afford at the extended stay motel where I had been living since my mother's funeral. My sister had told me the eviction was only business. My brother-in-law, Grant, had stood beside her in his charcoal suit and explained that the family trust required the house to be sold promptly. He had spoken gently, as if removing me from my home were a medical procedure he regretted, but had no choice except to perform. Then the contractor sent me a photograph. Behind the cabinets, on an old oak brace that had been sealed inside the wall since I was 12, were the words, "Evelyn Rose, this room is yours." Below them was my father's signature, and behind that brace, inside a narrow cavity no blueprint showed, the contractor had found a locked steel box. 3 questions came to me at once. Why had my father hidden my name in a wall? Why had my family ordered the kitchen demolished before the house was even listed? And why, less than 10 minutes after I received the photograph, did Grant call and tell me not to speak to the contractor again? Good day, dear listeners. It's Nora again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Evelyn Mercer. I was 48 years old when this happened, and for most of my adult life I worked as an architectural drafter for a small commercial design firm. I was not an architect. I always make that distinction because credentials matter, especially in a story about documents and signatures. Architects approved the designs. I translated their ideas into precise drawings that contractors could actually build from. My work taught me that every structure has 2 versions. There is the finished surface people admire, and there is the hidden system, carrying the weight. Walls can look perfectly straight while pipes leak behind them. A beautiful room can rest on a cracked beam. If something is wrong, the building usually tells you long before it fails. A stain appears, a door stops closing, a floor begins to slope by half an inch. Families are built the same way. I had lived with my mother, Margaret, in the old brick house on Alder Street since my divorce. At first, the arrangement was supposed to last 6 months. My marriage had ended quietly, without children, and without the dramatic betrayal people expect when they hear the word divorce. My husband and I had simply become 2 courteous strangers sharing expenses. I moved home, paid half the utilities, and began saving for a place of my own. Then my mother fell on the back steps. The fall itself was not catastrophic, but it exposed the beginning of a neurological condition that slowly affected her balance, memory, and judgment. 6 months became a year. A year became nearly 2 decades of doctor visits, medication schedules, grab bars, insurance appeals, and ordinary evenings spent together at the kitchen table. I do not say that as a complaint. My mother and I were not sentimental women, but we loved each other in practical ways. She ironed my blouses on Sunday. I labeled her pill organizer. She saved the corner piece of lasagna for me because she knew I liked the crisp edge. I redesigned the downstairs bathroom so she could use it safely and persuaded my employer to let me work from home 3 days a week. My younger sister, Caroline, lived 20 minutes away in a new development with stone facades and identical maple trees. She was a dental office manager, organized and socially graceful. Her husband, Grant Halpern, was a real estate attorney who represented developers, investors, and several families whose names appeared on hospital wings. Grant had the sort of politeness that made other people lower their voices. He never interrupted. He remembered birthdays. He wore ties in colors so muted they seemed chosen to avoid leaving an impression. When my mother's health began to decline, he offered to simplify the paperwork. My older brother, Paul, lived in Arizona and visited once every year or 2. He had a talent for appearing affectionate at holidays and unavailable during emergencies. When Mother needed a new specialist, Paul sent a bouquet. When she needed someone to sit with her for 6 hours after a medication reaction, he sent me a message saying I was an angel. I did not feel like an angel. I felt tired. Still, my life was modest and stable. I earned enough to contribute to the house. maintain a retirement account, and take one quiet trip each year. I had a circle of friends, a job I respected, and a small drafting table near the kitchen window where the morning light was best. I believed the house would eventually be divided equally among the three of us, Mother had said so many times. Nothing fancy, she once told us. You'll sell it, settle what needs settling, and each take your share. I never asked to see the documents. That was my first mistake, although I no longer punish myself for it. Trust is not stupidity. It is simply a material that should never be used where verification is required. The first warning sign appeared 18 months before Mother died. An envelope arrived from a bank I did not recognize. It was addressed to the Alder Street Family Preservation Trust, care of Margaret Mercer. When I carried it into the kitchen, Grant was already there. He had begun visiting every Tuesday afternoon, usually while I was at the office. He said he was helping Mother organize insurance forms and property tax records. That day, he took the envelope from my hand before I had set down my purse. That one is mine, he said. It's addressed to Mother. I mean, it's one of the matters I'm handling for her. He smiled, but his thumb covered the bank's return address. I asked Mother about it after he left. She frowned at the floor for a long moment and said Grant was consolidating some old accounts so I would not have to deal with a mess later. What old accounts? Your father's things. My father, Thomas Mercer, had died when I was 14. He was a union carpenter and restoration contractor, a patient man who could run his palm along a wall and tell whether the framing behind it had been rushed. He died after a scaffold collapse on a municipal renovation project. There had been a lawsuit, but adults had spoken around us in those days. I knew there was a settlement. I also knew most of it had supposedly gone toward medical bills, legal fees, and paying off the house. Whenever I asked for details, Mother's face tightened in the way it did when pain had become too old to explain. It was handled, she would say. After the bank envelope, small irregularities began accumulating. The property tax bill, which had always come directly to the house, started going to Grant's office. Mother's supplemental insurance premium was paid twice one month and not at all the next. A $9,800 withdrawal appeared on the checking account I used for household expenses, followed by a deposit labeled reimbursement 3 days later. When I asked Caroline, she sounded offended for Grant. He is doing this for free, Evie. Do you know what his hourly rate is? I'm asking what the reimbursement was for. Probably something related to the roof. You always assume there's a problem. I did not always assume there was a problem. I simply knew that unexplained numbers were like measurements that did not close on a floor plan. If one wall was 4 inches off, the error did not disappear because the room was attractive. I began keeping copies. At first, it was almost unconscious. I scanned the checking statements, the tax notices, Mother's insurance correspondence, and anything Grant asked her to sign. I stored the files in a folder on my office server under a harmless project code. I also kept a notebook with dates, because Mother sometimes forgot what had happened by evening. Grant noticed. One Tuesday, he stood beside my drafting table and lifted the corner of the notebook with one finger. "You're very thorough," he said. "It's part of my job." In families, excessive record keeping can sometimes feel like suspicion. Accurate records protect everyone. He released the page and smiled. Of course they do. That was how Grant threatened people. He never used the shape of a threat. He placed an idea in the room and allowed you to feel its weight. Mother's condition worsened the following spring. Some days, she was entirely herself. On others, she confused appointments or repeated a question 3 times. Her neurologist documented mild cognitive impairment, then early vascular dementia. Grant responded by bringing a notary to the house. I was not told in advance. I came home early because a client meeting had been canceled. Grant was in the dining room with Mother and a woman named Denise Bell, whose stamp and journal were spread across the table. A stack of papers sat beneath Mother's hand. Grant closed the folder when he saw me. "Routine health care authorization," he said. "I already have her medical power of attorney. This clarifies a few overlapping provisions." Mother looked tired. "It's all right, Evelyn. I asked to read the documents," Grant said. Attorney-client confidentiality prevented him from sharing them without Mother's authorization. I looked at her. "Mom, do you authorize him to show me?" She glanced at Grant before answering. It was only a brief movement, but I saw it. "Later," she said. There is a particular feeling that comes when you notice a wall carrying weight it was not designed to hold. Nothing has collapsed yet. The room still looks normal, but your body understands before your mind is ready. That night, I asked Mother whether she wanted another lawyer. I kept my tone gentle. She became agitated and accused me of wanting her house. The words hurt because they did not sound like her. Worse, they sounded like someone had rehearsed them with her. I backed away. I told her I loved her, made tea, and did not mention the papers again. 2 months later, Mother was admitted to the hospital with pneumonia. Caroline and I took turns at her bedside, though my turns somehow included every night. Grant came during business hours and spoke to doctors in the hallway. Paul promised to fly in, but did not arrive before she died. She passed just before sunrise on a Thursday, with my hand around hers and rain tapping the hospital window. Grief reduced the world to small tasks. Choose a dress, call the church, find the insurance policy, approve the flowers. I moved through those days as if following construction notes someone else had written. 4 days after the funeral, Grant asked the 3 siblings to meet at his office. His conference room overlooked the river. There was a carafe of water, 3 legal pads, and a box of tissues arranged with professional symmetry. Paul attended by video. Caroline sat beside Grant, not beside me. Grant explained that Mother's revocable trust had been amended 9 months before her death. Under the amendment, Caroline became successor trustee. Paul would receive a cash distribution of $75,000. The remainder of the estate, including the house, would pass to a limited liability company controlled by Caroline and Grant. I thought I had misunderstood. And me? Grant folded his hands. Your years of rent-free occupancy were characterized as an advancement against any inheritance. For several seconds, the room had no sound except the ventilation system. I had paid utilities property taxes for 6 years, groceries, repairs, and more than $14,000 in direct medical expenses. Grant knew that. Caroline knew it too. Mother would never describe it that way, I said. Paul's face shifted on the screen, but he said nothing. Grant slid a copy of the amendment toward me. My mother's signature appeared on the final page. Denise Bell's notary seal was below it. You have 30 days to vacate, Caroline said. I looked at my sister. You're evicting me? Her eyes filled with tears, which somehow made the cruelty worse. Please don't make this ugly, Grant corrected her in the same mild voice he used for everything. It is technically a notice terminating permissive occupancy. I remember staring at the document and noticing that Mother's middle initial was written with a narrow loop. By the final year of her life, her hands shook. She printed capital letters because cursive had become difficult, yet the signature on that amendment was smooth. I did not accuse anyone. I asked for a complete copy of the trust, all amendments, an accounting, and the documents establishing my supposed advancement. Grant's expression changed by less than a fraction. You should have counsel make that request. I will. I packed 23 years of my life into boxes. Caroline would not extend the deadline. Grant warned that contesting the trust could trigger a no-contest clause, even though he knew I had apparently been left nothing to lose. My friends helped me move furniture into storage. I took my clothes, my drafting equipment, Mother's blue mixing bowl, and the framed photograph of my father standing in the unfinished kitchen during the renovation he completed 2 years before he died. In the photograph, I was 12 and painfully thin, holding a carpenter's pencil. Dad had his arm around my shoulders. Behind us, the wall framing was exposed. I had looked at that photograph hundreds of times. I had never noticed the narrow vertical gap behind the pantry. On the day I left, Caroline stood on the porch while a locksmith changed the deadbolt. She told me the house needed to be sold quickly because carrying costs were draining the estate. Then why are you remodeling the kitchen? I asked. She looked surprised. I had seen the contractor's permit application taped inside the front window. Demolition, cabinet replacement, electrical relocation. The applicant was Northline Renovation, a firm I knew through work. Grant says buyers expect an open layout, she answered. The next morning, Grant emailed me a formal demand not to enter the property. 11 days later, the contractor called. His name was Luis Ortega. We had worked on 2 restaurant projects together, and he remembered me. During demolition, his crew had removed the pantry cabinets and found an oak brace between two studs. My name and my father's signature were carved into it. The brace was unusual because it was attached with finish screws instead of framing nails. When Luis removed it, he found a cavity roughly 14 inches wide and 3 feet deep. Inside was the steel box. Luis had not opened it. He photographed the cavity, stopped work in that area, and called the project owner, which was the limited liability company named in Mother's Trust Amendment. Grant arrived within 40 minutes. He told me it was construction debris, Luis said. He ordered me to put it in his car. Did you? There was a pause. Your father trained my uncle. My uncle taught me never to throw away something a dead carpenter took the trouble to hide. Luis had asked Grant to sign a change order log, acknowledging receipt of the box. Grant refused. While they argued, Luis's foreman noticed a brass luggage tag wired to the box handle. It read, "Property of Evelyn Rose Mercer to be delivered unopened." That was why Luis called me. Before I could ask where the box was, Grant's call came through. I did not answer. He left a voicemail. "Evelyn, some personal effects may have been discovered during demolition. They are part of the property and therefore under the trustee's control. Do not interfere with the contractor. Any attempt to remove material could be treated as theft." His voice was calm. The message frightened me more than shouting would have. I sat in my car with the photograph enlarged on my phone. I could see my father's chisel marks in the letters of my name. The R in Rose had the same deep-angled leg he used when marking tools. I wanted to drive to the house. I wanted to stand in the kitchen and demand the box. Instead, I called a lawyer. Her name was Naomi Price. She was an estate litigator recommended by one of the architects at my firm. Naomi was 61, compact, silver-haired, and unimpressed by dramatic language. Her office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian building. She listened without interrupting, then asked me to repeat the exact wording on the brass tag. "Do you have the photo metadata?" she asked. Luis texted the image. "We need the original files, not screenshots. We need the permit, the demolition log, names of everyone who saw the box, and written confirmation of where it is now." I felt my breathing slow. Naomi approached confusion the way I approached a damaged building. Establish dimensions, identify loads, and do not remove anything until you understand what it supports. She made 3 calls. The first was to Grant, informing him that I was represented and demanding preservation of the box, the wall cavity, all trust records, electronic communications, and surveillance footage. The second was to Luis, asking him to suspend work voluntarily until photographs and witness statements could be secured. The third was to the probate court, where she prepared an emergency petition for a temporary restraining order. "Will a judge care about a box in a wall?" I asked. "A judge will care that a fiduciary rushed to seize a container, labeled for a disinherited beneficiary, while refusing to provide an accounting." Naomi leaned back in her chair. "The carving is a clue, Evelyn. Do not confuse it with proof. Sentiment does not transfer title. We win, if we win, through admissible evidence." Those words became the foundation of everything that followed. That evening, I returned to the motel and made a list. I listed every suspicious letter, withdrawal, visit, signature, and conversation I could remember. I downloaded backups of my scanned records. I photographed the notebook pages. I forwarded Grant's voicemail to Naomi without editing the file. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and allowed myself to be afraid. If Grant had forged the amendment, he had planned it, while I was making Mother's meals and sleeping 10 feet from her bedroom. If he had not forged it, then perhaps my mother truly had chosen to erase me. Both possibilities hurt. One meant I had been robbed. The other meant I had misunderstood the last 20 years of my life. At 2 a.m, I studied the old photograph of the unfinished kitchen. There was Dad, smiling. There was the open framing. And on the back, in his handwriting, were 6 words I had never considered important. "For Evie, when the walls are closed." The probate judge granted a temporary order the next afternoon. No one could open, alter, remove, or destroy the box. Grant was required to place it with the clerk pending a hearing. He objected that the box had already been transported to his office for safekeeping, but the judge ordered a deputy to retrieve it. When it was opened 6 days later, Naomi, Grant, a court reporter, and I were present. The box smelled of cedar, metal, and old paper. Inside were 2 sealed envelopes, a ring of keys, a small ledger, 3 cassette tapes, a stack of bank statements, and a blue legal folder wrapped in waxed cloth. On top was a letter addressed to me. My hands shook, so Naomi read it aloud. My father had written the letter 9 months before his death. He explained that part of the Alder Street renovation included a small drafting nook for me, hidden behind what was then a pantry wall. I had spent childhood weekends following him from job to job, drawing floor plans on scrap lumber. He believed I would one day design buildings, although life led me only halfway to that dream. The room had never been completed, because the city required an electrical revision, and the lawsuit after his death consumed the family's attention. But the letter was about more than the room. Dad wrote that he and Mother had created the Mercer Family Preservation Trust using proceeds from an earlier land sale. Trust owned the house and an investment account. Mother could live in the house for life and use income for health and maintenance. After her death, the house and remaining principal were to pass to me. Separate life insurance proceeds were designated for Caroline and Paul. I have tried to build this fairly, he wrote. Fair does not always mean identical. Your mother and I believe you will be the one who keeps this home standing. The blue folder contained what appeared to be an original trust agreement, dated 1997, an amendment signed by both parents in 1998, and a schedule listing the house, plus an investment account at Mid-Ohio Mutual Bank. The ledger tracked deposits totaling $612,400. Most came from a land sale and my father's life insurance policy. At the historical rates shown in the statements, the account could have grown substantially over 30 years. The most disturbing item was a copy of a letter my father had sent to a lawyer named Howard Klein. It instructed Klein to record a memorandum of trust and give the original documents to Mother. A handwritten note at the bottom said, "Margaret worried the children will fight. Duplicate sealed for Evelyn in kitchen chase. She knows the room exists but not the box." Grant called the documents unverified papers found in a wall. Naomi asked whether he recognized Howard Klein's name. A deceased solo practitioner, Grant replied. He was your first employer, wasn't he? For the first time, Grant's composure slipped. It was not dramatic. He blinked once before answering. Briefly, many years ago, the question I had feared, whether Mother had chosen to disinherit me, was replaced by a larger one. If Grant knew the lawyer who created my father's trust, how long had he known the box might exist? Our investigation began with public records. The county recorder had a memorandum of the Mercer Family Preservation Trust filed in 1998. It did not reveal beneficiaries, but it confirmed the trust's existence and named my parents as trustees. A later document, recorded 6 months after my father died, transferred the house from the trust to Mother individually. That deed bore Mother's signature as surviving trustee. It also bore Howard Klein's notary seal. Naomi obtained the archived probate file from Klein's closed practice. His time records showed that Grant, then a law clerk, had worked on Mercer Trust administration for 4.7 hours during the month the deed was prepared. Grant had not merely heard of the trust. He had handled its file. The next step was tracing the account. Mid-Ohio Mutual had merged twice and no longer existed, but the account number in Dad's ledger led a forensic accountant, Samuel Reed, through successor bank records. The Preservation Trust account had not disappeared. It had been transferred, renamed, and gradually drained. For years, Mother used only modest amounts for taxes and repairs. The balance reached approximately $1.46 million shortly before Grant began simplifying her affairs. Then, a series of transfers began. $120,000 went to Halpern Development Services. $85,000 went to Alder Residential Partners. $214,000 purchased a share in a medical office project in which Caroline and Grant held an indirect interest. Smaller payments covered Grant's professional fees, though he had repeatedly told us he was working for free. In total, more than $730,000 had moved out of the trust or its successor accounts within 18 months. Grant's explanation was that Mother had authorized investments intended to benefit the estate. The documents authorizing them all carried her signature. That might have ended the case if the signatures had been genuine, and Mother had understood the transactions. But my scans created a timeline. On March 8, Mother signed a pharmacy delivery receipt with a shaky printed M. On March 11, she signed a physical therapy form with the same tremor. On March 9, between those dates, she had supposedly executed a 12-page investment authorization in smooth, confident cursive. The paper looked right. The sequence did not. Samuel also found something stranger. The trust amendment used to evict me referred to the limited liability company as Alder Heritage Holdings, LLC, an Ohio limited liability company formed on January 12. State records showed the company was not formed until January 19, 7 days after Mother had supposedly signed the amendment. In drafting, a future condition can be planned. In evidence, a document cannot accurately identify a legal entity that did not yet exist unless someone filled in the information later or created the entire document afterward. Naomi filed a civil complaint alleging breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, fraud, undue influence, and civil conspiracy. She also asked the probate court to remove Caroline as trustee and impose a constructive trust over assets purchased with the missing money. The pressure began immediately. Paul called from Arizona. He said, Grant had told him that my lawsuit would consume the estate and leave everyone bankrupt. Why can't you accept that Mom made a decision? He asked. Have you seen the bank transfers? Grant says they were investments. Did Grant tell you the trust was created by Dad? Silence. Then Paul said he told me those papers could have been planted. The accusation was so absurd I nearly laughed, but I remembered Naomi's instructions. Do not argue. Do not speculate. Document. Please send me that statement in an email, I said. He hung up. Caroline came next. She sent photographs of Mother smiling at her children and wrote that I was destroying the family's memory. She said, Grant's clients were hearing rumors. She asked whether I wanted her daughters to lose their home. Naomi told me guilt was often used where facts were weak. Then Grant sent an offer through his own attorney. They would pay me $150,000 and return my furniture from storage. In exchange, I would dismiss all claims, disclaim any interest in the house, agree that the box documents were invalid, and sign a confidentiality clause preventing me from discussing the dispute with banks, law enforcement, professional regulators, or the media. The last part mattered more than the amount. They aren't buying peace, Naomi said. They're buying silence. We rejected it. 2 days later, an anonymous complaint reached my employer accusing me of using company equipment to fabricate legal exhibits. The allegation was false, but the timing was precise. My firm placed me on paid administrative leave while it reviewed server logs. I wanted to call Grant and tell him exactly what I thought of him. Instead, I asked our technology director to preserve my login history and document hashes. The review proved that every scan had been uploaded on the dates shown, and none had been altered. The attack meant to discredit me created independent authentication for my records. That was the moment I stopped feeling like a displaced woman asking her family for fairness. I understood that I was a witness, and witnesses do not improve evidence by shouting at the person who fears it. The stronger proof came from Denise Bell, the notary. At first, she confirmed Grant's account. She signed an affidavit stating that Mother personally appeared, understood the trust amendment, and signed voluntarily on January 12. Naomi subpoenaed Denise's notary journal, appointment calendar, mobile phone location records, and invoices. Her journal had a line for Margaret Mercer on January 12, but the entry had been squeezed between 2 older entries in different ink. The sequential notarial certificate number belonged to an acknowledgement Denise performed 4 months later. Her phone records placed her 90 miles away at a continuing education seminar on the afternoon she claimed to be at our house. Her invoice was created on February 3, and the weather became evidence. Denise's affidavit described Mother sitting beside the sunlit bay window in the dining room. Historical weather records showed a heavy winter storm that day, and my timestamp photographs showed plywood covering that window while storm damage was being repaired. More importantly, Mother spent January 12 in a rehabilitation clinic after a minor stroke. Medical records documented that she could not have been home. When confronted, Denise changed her story. She admitted Grant had asked her to notarize a signature Mother had supposedly made earlier. He told her it was an emergency estate planning correction, and promised to obtain a ratification. Months later, after Mother's death, he asked Denise to write January 12 in her journal and sign the affidavit. Denise insisted she had not known the document was fraudulent. Naomi did not debate her. She recorded the testimony and sent the transcript to the court. Then Samuel found the point of no return. The electronic file used to print the trust amendment had been produced in response to discovery. Its metadata listed the author as Grant Halpern. The creation date was February 2, 3 weeks after the stated signing date and 5 days after Alder Heritage Holdings legally came into existence. Grant claimed metadata could be unreliable. The law firm's document management system was less flexible. Its audit log showed him opening the file, revising the beneficiary paragraph, and printing it on February 3 at 11:42 p.m. Mother had been dead for 12 days. The amendment disinheriting me was created after her death. Naomi called me after Samuel verified the log with the firm's outside technology vendor. I was in the motel laundry room, watching my clothes circle behind scratched glass. "We have him," she said. I sat down on a plastic chair. I expected triumph. What I felt was grief. For months, part of me had carried the possibility that Mother had signed those papers in a lucid moment and decided my care counted as rent. The audit log released me from that fear. It also revealed how deliberately my sister and her husband had used Mother's illness and death as tools. I cried quietly among the humming dryers. The next morning, I went back to work. My employer had cleared me, and the anonymous complaint was added to our evidence. Grant and Caroline appeared at my motel 3 nights later. I saw them through the lobby glass and called Naomi before agreeing to speak. She instructed me to remain in the public seating area, say nothing substantive, and record the conversation if lawful. Ohio permits a participant to record a conversation, but Naomi still wanted me to state that I was doing so. Caroline looked exhausted. Grant looked exactly as he always did. "I'm recording this conversation," I said. "That seems unnecessary," Grant replied. "Then you don't have to stay." He sat. Caroline began by saying the situation had gone too far. She said the investments could be returned if given time. She spoke about her daughter's, Mother's reputation, and the shame of a public court hearing. I asked one question. "Did you know the amendment was created after Mom died?" Caroline looked at Grant. He placed a hand over hers. "The date issue is a technical dispute being exploited by aggressive counsel. A dead person cannot sign a new document. No one is claiming she did. The amendment claims she did." Grant's voice remained low. "Your father's papers may create uncertainty, but uncertainty is expensive. Even if you prevail, years of litigation could leave you with a damaged house and legal bills. We are offering a private correction." "A correction to what?" He did not answer directly. He offered $400,000, the house, and a written apology from Caroline. I would be required to destroy copies of the bank records, withdraw the motion for sanctions, and state that the trust amendment resulted from a clerical error. "Did you send the complaint to my employer?" I asked. "Be careful with unsupported accusations." I looked at my sister. "Did he?" Her face answered before her mouth did. Grant stood. His politeness finally thinned. "You are not equipped for the consequences of humiliating people with serious resources." I had heard contractors talk about load-bearing walls with less caution than he used for the word resources. I kept my voice level. "Please direct all future offers to Naomi." Caroline began crying. Grant guided her toward the door. Before she left, she turned back and said, "Mom wanted us to take care of each other." "I did," I said, "for 23 years. The court removed Caroline as trustee the following week and appointed an independent fiduciary. It also froze the development accounts that had received trust money and prohibited Grant from transferring several properties. Discovery moved quickly after that because the judge had lost patience with incomplete answers. Grant sat for deposition in Naomi's conference room on a gray Monday morning. He wore a Navy suit and answered the first hour of questions with careful precision. Yes, he had worked for Howard Klein. Yes, he had seen documents relating to the Mercer Trust. No, he did not specifically remember the remainder beneficiaries. Yes, he helped Mother with financial matters. No, he never acted as her formal attorney regarding the disputed amendment. Naomi placed the 1998 trust amendment in front of him. His initials appeared on a routing slip attached to the archived file. "What did you understand Evelyn Mercer's interest to be?" she asked. "I don't recall. Did you bill 4.7 hours without reading the document?" "I performed administrative work." She showed him an internal memo he had drafted as a law clerk. It summarized the trust and stated, "Residence and trust corpus passed to Evelyn Rose Mercer upon Margaret's death." Grant's lawyer objected, but he had to answer. The memo appears to say that Naomi moved to the bank transfers. Grant described them as authorized investments. She asked why $120,000 had been transferred to his consulting company without a promissory note, ownership certificate, security agreement, or independent appraisal. The supporting file may be incomplete. She showed him an email to Caroline. "Move the first 120 before E starts asking for statements." Grant said the letter E referred to estate expenses. Naomi then displayed the full thread. Caroline's reply read, "Evelyn already noticed the bank envelope. He requested a break." After the break, Naomi addressed the trust amendment. Grant repeated that the document reflected instructions Mother had given while alive, and that its later electronic creation merely memorialized those wishes. "Why does the document contain Margaret Mercer's signature? A signature image may have been applied for formatting." "By whom?" "I don't recall." Naomi showed him the document management audit log. His user account had inserted an image file named margaretsugnit.ol.png. He claimed staff members sometimes used his login. The outside vendor's security records showed the login originated from Grant's home computer using multi-factor authentication approved on his personal phone. For the first time all day, he stopped answering immediately. Naomi waited. Silence in a deposition is useful. People who manipulate conversation depend on others rushing to fill empty space. Finally, Grant said, "I relied on my understanding of Margaret's intent." "Did Margaret authorize you to create a trust amendment after her death?" His lawyer instructed him not to answer based on attorney-client privilege. Naomi asked who the client was. The lawyer said the estate. The independent fiduciary's attorney, who was also present, stated on the record that the estate did not assert privilege over fraudulent conduct. Grant still refused. That refusal became part of Naomi's sanctions motion. Caroline's deposition occurred 2 days later. She arrived prepared to protect her husband. She said Mother had resented my presence in the house. She said I controlled Mother's medication and isolated her from family. She said the trust amendment honored Mother's true wishes. Then Naomi showed her text messages. Grant, "Once Margaret is gone, Evie will ask for the old trust." Caroline, "She thinks the house is thirds." Grant, "Let her keep thinking that until we secure the accounts." Caroline began to cry. Her lawyer asked for a break. When they returned, Caroline corrected her testimony. She admitted she had signed blank transfer forms at Grant's direction. She admitted Mother never discussed disinheriting me. She admitted she knew the February document had been backdated, though Grant told her it was legal because it confirmed oral instructions. Then she revealed why the kitchen demolition had been rushed. During Mother's last hospitalization, Grant found Howard Klein's old memo in a file. It mentioned Blueplate documents preserved at residence. He did not know where they were. After Mother died, he ordered a full kitchen demolition because the old renovation pictures suggested Dad had built a concealed service chase. My family had not found the box by accident. They evicted me so they could search for it. Luis Ortega's testimony established exactly how the box was discovered and preserved. He produced original photographs, crew timesheets, the permit application, and helmet camera footage from a safety system his company had recently begun testing. The footage showed the wall opening, the oak brace, the carving, the intact box, and Grant entering the kitchen 43 minutes later. It also captured Grant saying, "No photographs. This container belongs to the LLC." He had denied under oath that he knew a box existed before it was delivered to his office. The video turned that denial into possible perjury. Our case reached its decisive hearing 7 months after the eviction. It was not a dramatic jury trial. There were no gasps from a crowded gallery and no judge pounding a gavel. Real legal consequences often arrive through binders, sworn testimony, and patient questions. The probate courtroom had pale walls and fluorescent lights. Naomi presented the structure of the case the way an engineer explains a failure. First, the original trust documents, supported by the recorded memorandum, Klein's archive, bank records, and handwriting analysis, established my remainder interest. Second, the deed removing the house from the trust had been prepared while Grant worked on the file. Even if the deed were valid, the court could impose a constructive trust because Mother held the property subject to the established plan, and Grant later exploited confidential knowledge of it. Third, the alleged amendment was impossible. It named an entity not yet formed, described a signing location where Mother was not present, carried a false notarization, and existed electronically only after her death. Fourth, the financial trail showed self-dealing. Trust money moved into entities controlled by Grant and Caroline without ordinary investment documentation. Finally, the eviction and kitchen demolition demonstrated consciousness of wrongdoing. They were designed to separate me from the property and locate the duplicate trust papers before I could discover them. Grant's attorneys argued that Dad's documents were stale, that Mother had authority to change her estate plan, and that family conversations supported her wish to compensate Caroline for emotional care. The judge asked a simple question: where is the valid instrument by which Margaret exercised that authority? They had no answer. The court ruled from the bench on the central issues and issued a detailed written order later. The supposed amendment was declared void. The house was placed under a constructive trust for me, pending final accounting. Caroline was permanently removed as fiduciary. Grant and his entities were ordered to disgorge the transferred funds, profits, and fees. Liens were placed on 2 development properties. The court awarded attorney fees because the defense had relied on fabricated evidence and referred the record to the county prosecutor, the state bar, and the notary commission. The judge did not call Grant evil. Judges rarely use the language wounded families want to hear. She called his conduct deliberate, self-interested, deceptive, and incompatible with the duties of an attorney and fiduciary. Those words were enough. The civil case settled before a damages trial. Grant's professional liability insurer contributed after reviewing the audit logs and deposition transcript. The development partnership returned the traceable capital rather than litigate liens against its property. A court-supervised sale of one of Grant's investments covered part of the remainder. After legal fees, taxes, and accounting costs, the trust recovered a little over $1.1 million, including investment gains attributed to the diverted funds. I did not receive a suitcase of money. The independent fiduciary placed the recovery into diversified accounts, with safeguards I approved after obtaining separate financial advice. The house title was restored to the trust and then distributed to me under Dad's original plan. Grant resigned from his firm. His law license was suspended on an interim basis and later revoked after disciplinary proceedings. He eventually pleaded guilty to charges related to forgery, tampering with records, and theft from the trust. The sentence included incarceration, restitution, and a prohibition against acting as a fiduciary. Denise surrendered her notary commission and cooperated with prosecutors. Her decision to tell the truth did not erase what she had done, but it prevented her from sharing Grant's full consequences. Caroline was not charged with forging the amendment. She entered a civil settlement, returned assets she had received, and agreed to a judgment that would be enforceable if she concealed additional property. She and Grant divorced the following year. Paul returned the $75,000 distribution. He sent it through the fiduciary without a note. Months later, he wrote me a letter admitting that he had accepted Grant's story. Accepting it required less from him than confronting what had been done. That sentence was the first honest thing he had said to me in years. Justice did not restore my family to what it had been. It revealed that the structure I remembered had already failed behind the walls. I moved back into the Alder Street house 10 months after the contractor's call. For the first week, I slept on a mattress in the living room because the kitchen remained open to the studs. People assumed I would install marble counters and expensive appliances with the recovered money. I did not. Luis and I completed the room my father had planned. It was not truly secret anymore. We turned the narrow service area and adjacent pantry into a small drafting nook with a window, a desk and shelves for my father's tools. The oak brace bearing my name could no longer carry structural weight, so Luis mounted it behind conservation glass on the wall. I kept the old blue mixing bowl on one shelf. The recovered money gave me security. But security felt different from wealth. It meant I could reduce my hours and refuse projects that required dishonest shortcuts. It meant a roof repair did not threaten my retirement. It meant I could consult an attorney before signing something, instead of calculating whether advice was affordable. I also created a small fund through a local legal aid organization to help family caregivers obtain independent estate planning advice. Caregivers are often told that love should be enough. Love is essential, but it is not an accounting system. It does not replace a power of attorney, a written compensation agreement, a current beneficiary designation, or access to records. Caroline and I did not reconcile quickly. For nearly 2 years, we communicated only through lawyers. Then one morning, she mailed me Mother's recipe box. Inside was a note saying she was in counseling and did not expect forgiveness. She admitted that she had allowed resentment to become permission. She had resented that Mother depended on me. She had resented that I was praised for sacrifices she had not been willing to make. Grant transformed that resentment into a storge in which taking the house was not theft but balance. I did not answer for 3 months. When I did, I invited her to meet me in a public garden. We walked for 40 minutes. She apologized without asking me to make her feel better. That mattered. We are not close now, but we are honest. Sometimes honesty is the only safe material left for rebuilding. Paul calls every Sunday. I do not always answer, and he understands why. As for me, I planted lavender along the back steps and replaced the cracked concrete where Mother fell years ago. I traveled to Santa Fe to study adobe restoration, something I had wanted to do since my 20s. I still work at the same firm, though I now mentor young drafters and teach them to mark every revision clearly. The steel box is stored in a bank vault. The documents have been professionally preserved and digitized in 3 locations. That may sound excessive, but some lessons deserve redundancy. On quiet mornings, I sit in the drafting nook with coffee and look at the chisel marks in my name. For a long time, I believed the carving meant my father had somehow reached through the years to rescue me. It is a comforting thought, but it is not entirely true. My father left a clue. Luis protected it. Naomi understood it. Samuel followed the money. Denise eventually told the truth. The court enforced out the law, but I had to do the quiet work between those moments. I had to resist the urge to confront before I was prepared. I had to preserve ugly records when forgetting would have felt easier. I had to accept that people I loved were capable of using my decency as access. Most of all, I had to understand that asking for evidence did not make me disloyal. Money was never the deepest thing hidden behind that wall. What was hidden there was a version of me my family had tried to erase. The observant girl holding a carpenter's pencil, the woman who had kept a house standing, the daughter whose place had been decided long before a forged document said otherwise. If there is one lesson I carried from all of this, it is that peace built on silence is not peace. It is only pressure concealed behind a finished surface. Real peace needs a sound foundation. Truth, records, boundaries, and the courage to let an unsafe structure come apart. I hope you never find your name hidden inside a wall. But if someone tries to convince you that your memory is wrong, that your questions are selfish, or that keeping records is an act of betrayal, pause before you surrender what you know. Stay calm, make copies, get independent advice. Let evidence speak in the room where manipulation once had the loudest voice. I know what I did when my family evicted me and a contractor found my name behind the kitchen wall. But what would you have done?